Well, hey there, it's Saturday, and this is Dewar from the Astoria Christian Church. It seemed appropriate today to shoot today's message from Dismal Nitch, which is where in November of 1805, Lewis and Clark spent a horrific 6 days of a winter storm huddled right in this very area. I'll have my camera lady pan up a little bit there to the trees. You can kind of just see we're right on the shoreline of the Columbia River here. They were only 10 miles from their destination. They wanted to get to the Pacific Ocean, and they were stuck here. And it was one of the few times in the whole journey where they were actually afraid for their lives. And I chose Dismal Nitch because they're talking about Saturday, and it reminded me like yesterday I talked about the cacophony of chaos with sea lions, and how that kind of made me think about Good Friday and who's in charge. Well, Dismal Nitch does the same thing on Saturday. The followers of Jesus were huddled after he had been tried and crucified, and he'd been laid in the grave, and they were afraid for their lives, and they didn't know what was going to come next, and they were fugitives. They were disappointed. They were just ruined. They had no clue that Jesus was going to raise from the dead, and they lived in Dismal Nitch. Now, the events of Friday are well known to everybody. You've got the trial of Jesus. You've got the crucifixion. Jesus was tried before Herod and Pilate. Barabbas was released. The crowd chose him over Jesus. Jesus has a humiliating beating by the soldiers. He's on the cross. Everyone knows this stuff by and large. There's an earthquake, which is kind of freaky, and the temple curtain is torn in two from the top, and old saints come out of the grave. And the centurion stands at the foot of the cross and says, "Surely this was the Son of God." He was so impressed by what was happening around him. We all know that story. Even if you're not a follower of Jesus, odds are you've picked up on that somewhere. And then Sundays, obviously Sunday's story. We all know that. That's Easter. That's Resurrection Sunday. That's the basis of our faith. And the women go to the garden tomb, and they want to anoint the body of Jesus because they're not expecting a resurrection. Remember that we're used to it now. We're 2,000 years later. This was brand new to them. And they find the angels there, like, "Why do you search for the living among the dead?" And they go tell the apostles, and they don't believe them. Peter and John, heroes of the faith, they go running to the tomb because they don't believe the women. But then there's Saturday, and the Bible says very little about Saturday. The only thing we're told is Pilate said, "Okay, post some guards and make sure this guy, no one steals the body." And then the story gets out that he's been raised from the dead. Some churches call Saturday, they call it Easter Eve, or they call it the Great Sabbath because Jesus rested. Some churches call it Black Saturday, and churches that have altars will put black cloth on top of their altars. I think the church I grew up in, the Episcopal Church, I know they used to use different colors during this time of the year, and I'm wondering if one of them was black for Black Saturday. But for those first disciples, this is a tough day. It's the day when they realize that they've got to go on, even though Jesus isn't going to be with them. They get together and they're discussing what to do, kind of like we do after a funeral, like you have done after someone dies unexpectedly. You have the meeting after the funeral and go, what do we do next? And divvy up the responsibilities. And they're reminiscing. They're like, we were going to change the world. We had so much hope. Jesus, he talked about some really great stuff, and now he's gone. And they talk about what happened. He failed. His mission failed. His kingdom was over, and he couldn't get enough followers. He couldn't get the power players to play. He couldn't get ordinary people on board. He couldn't even get his closest followers to stick with him in his darkest moments. Remember on Thursday night, Gethsemane. We haven't even talked about that, but they couldn't even stay awake with him as he prepared himself in prayer. Saturday is the day your dreams die. That's why I want to talk about Saturday. Have you ever had a Saturday? Saturday, it's the day of silence. After the agony of Good Friday, God goes silent. The door slams in your face. You cry out to God, and his response is crickets. Saturday. Some people live their whole lives on a Saturday. It's a day we don't talk about. It's the in-between day. We know about Friday. We know about Sunday. Saturday is the day of loss. This is going to resonate with a lot of you, I think, especially now at this time of the global coronavirus pandemic. But Saturday's the day of loss. We've all had them. It's the day your spouse walks away. It's the day your mom and dad divorce. I remember I was 12. My parents finally told us they were splitting up for good. And I was devastated. That has echoed, resounded for 50 years. You know what that's like, some of you. Saturday is the day the diagnosis, the doctor gives you the diagnosis that you feared. And some of you, that's very fresh. I spoke to a good friend of mine just a night or two ago. Discovered he had cancer. He wasn't feeling well, went to the doctor, said, let's do the blood test, and whammo. It's like, wow. It's waiting time. Saturday is the day your best friend maybe puts a knife in your back. Some of you have experienced that. Saturday is the day that the adoption agency closes its doors and all the money you've invested is gone, and now you're heartbroken and you're childless, and your whole future is in chaos because your dreams were pinned on this particular child that you were going to adopt. Or maybe Saturday's the day that the police knock on your door in the middle of the night. That's never good. Some of you know what that's like, to get the news that someone has been killed or is missing or there's been an accident. And the waiting begins. Saturday's the day you lose your job. Record numbers of unemployment right now, so we're all familiar with that. We all know people that have lost their jobs. Saturday's the day that the judge awards custody of your kids to your spouse who's toxic and has not their best interests in heart, but only hurting you. And you and your friends are like, wow, how did that happen? That's tough. That's a Saturday moment. Saturday is the day that you lose your house or your land or your business. And there's going to be a lot of that coming up. Simply put, Saturday is the day that your dreams die. And we've all had them. And some of you can put a very specific date on your Saturday, can't you? So there's basically 3 responses you can have to your Saturday. The first one is despair. A lot of people came into this. They just give up on God altogether and give up on the church, give up on Jesus, give up on the church. There's actually a whole bunch of people now that are despairing of the church. They're called the Duns. Maybe they still believe in God, but the church has hurt them so much that who needs the church? I got God, and they pursue their own thing, which is sad, but I get it. I know people who had a vibrant relationship with God once, and then they were hurt, and they've just thrown that all out and said it's just not worth it. Despair. Another reaction to your Saturday could be denial. Just put on the happy face and look like everything's going great, and we just don't talk about those parts of our life that create pain and doubt and do all sorts of havoc at our soul level, and then you can wait. Sometimes the most God-honoring thing that you can do is just wait, and it's hard for us because, as I said last week on Palm Sunday, especially us in North America, we're control freaks. It's a human thing. It's not just North America. We're control freaks. We want to forge our own future, and I'm not going to wait for something else to move me forward. But have you learned that there are times in your life where you are powerless to control the outcome? All you can do is wait. It's driving you nuts, and it's hard to go through that. Did you know that many people in the Bible were experts at waiting? Just to name a few, Abraham waited a lifetime to get a son. 90 some odd years old, he and his wife, they were ancient. Along comes Isaac. Zechariah and Elizabeth in the New Testament, John the Baptist, his parents were old. They figured they're never going to have a kid. All of a sudden, whammo, they got a kid. Moses, he spent 40 years kicking dust bunnies in the desert. Had a promising start, great education, great career, great personal charisma. Clearly, God was going to do something with him, and next thing you know, he's in exile and waiting. Probably gave up a long time ago that God was ever going to do anything through. And one day, there's a bush over there. It's on fire. It's not burning up. I think I'll go check it out. And God called him, said, okay, you've waited long enough. All these and many more, they were engaged in what has been called the holy act of waiting. Some even believe that God had given up on them, but he hadn't, and maybe that's where you are too. God's given up on me. I get that. God gets that. It's natural. But guess what? I don't think it's true. I don't think God ever gives up on you. You know what the most common psalm is in the book of Psalms? That's right in the middle of your Bible. If you're not familiar with the Bible, just kind of open the middle, you'll probably find Psalms. One of the most common psalms is the complaint psalm. People crying out to God, "Where are you? You haven't showed up yet." For example, Psalm 73, one of my favorites, the writer says, "I have wasted my time being faithful to you, God. The more I serve you, the worse things get. And not only that, but the people that don't give a rat's patootie about you, guess what? They're doing great. They've got great incomes. They've got all the health. They've got all the best houses, blah, blah, blah." I love that psalm because the writer is waiting. I'll let you go back and read it and you can see how it ends. It ends pretty cool, but you figure that one out. But this idea of waiting on God is a very biblical theme. Let me talk to you about Kara Tippett. She knew what it was to wait on God. She knew what it was to live on Saturday. She was a beautiful mother of 4. She was the wife of a church planter in Colorado. 5 years ago, she died of cancer. But she had written a book. The book was called The Hardest Peace, Expecting Grace in the Midst of Life's Hard. She wrote about what it was like to live on Saturday, what it was like to wait. And if you're living in Saturday right now, let me recommend that. Kara Tippett's The Hardest Peace, Expecting Grace in the Midst of Life's Hard. But during her struggle with cancer, she became aware of another cancer patient, 29-year-old Brittany Maynard. Brittany made national news when she announced that she was going to have a doctor end her life. Kara Tippett wrote her a letter, and she made a heartfelt plea for her to reconsider that decision. And in that letter, she wrote these words: "Suffering is not the absence of goodness. It's not the absence of beauty, but perhaps it can be the place where true beauty can be known." I would change that for today's purpose to read, "Saturday is not the absence of goodness. Saturday is not the absence of beauty, but perhaps Saturday can be the place where true beauty can be known." Now, sadly, Brittany Maynard did not take those words to heart, and she went ahead and she went through with her plan to have herself killed. What I'm trying to say as we consider these 3 days that rocked the world is this: if you find yourself living in Saturday, that's okay. It's normal. Doesn't mean God is mad at you. Doesn't mean God has forgotten about you. Doesn't mean God doesn't have a plan. It just means that you're living in a broken world, and the promise of Sunday, the hope of Sunday, is it will all one day be changed and be as it was originally intended to be. God's not angry because you're human and you're feeling these things. The deafening silence of God that you may be experiencing, your disappointment with God that you may be experiencing but feel bad about and don't feel like you can tell anyone about, your heartbrokenness and all of this, combined with your holy act of waiting, those are the raw materials from which God's going to create something beautiful. The question is, do you believe that? As you endure your dismal niche, your Saturday, do you believe that God is going to come through at some point? I don't know if you can see it real well, but right over there in the mist is the snow-capped top of Mount St. Helens. I have wanted to see that since we moved here. I didn't see it on the drive out because the weather wasn't good, but we got across the bridge and we looked out that way. It's like, holy cow, what is that? Yeah, it's Mount St. Helens. One of my favorite Psalms is Psalm 121. Let me encourage you to read that. The psalmist gets it right. He says, I lift up my eyes to the hills. From where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the creator of heaven and earth. And I think of that as I look out over Mount St. Helens. But let me leave you with another psalm. And it's my prayer for you that you would be able to say this. Psalm 130, verses 5 and 6. I wait for the Lord. My soul waits, and in his word I hope. My soul waits for the Lord, more than watchmen for the morning. More than watchmen for the morning. And if you've ever worked a night shift job, you know what it's like to wait for that first crack of sunlight to come over the horizon. It's Saturday. Wait well, my friends.